If you're new in town or just new to this whole podcast thing, you're tuning in to Law by Night, the podcast that discusses all things vampiric with no fear of breaching the Masquerade. In this episode, we continue to unravel the mysteries behind the origins, motives, and cultures of the 16 ghostly guilds in the world of darkness. This episode will focus on the Masquers Guild and their Moliate Arcanos. Pretty grim, isn't it? What? You don't think so? Look at it again, dear explorer. This young woman, murdered by that bloody risen Christian who we still have been unable to catch, has twisted this woman's face all around 5 times, so no, she is not unharmed. There is no Botox on this godforsaken planet that can make anyone's face that tightly stretched. Most would think it's pretty obvious what has happened here, that this poor individual has been affected by the Moliate Arcanos, which you may remember is associated with the Masquers Guild in the Stygian Empire. At least, that's what my associates agree on, but they forget Moliate only works on plasm, not flesh and bone, or perhaps I'm wrong. Who knows? It will be interesting to discover ourselves, won't it not? Anywho, with such a, visibly potent power at their disposal, it would be fair to assume the maskers for whom the Moliate Arcanos is associated with are one of the criminal guilds, right? Well, I know that you know that I know that I'm teasing, for I know that you know that I know the maskers are one of the great guilds whose corpus moulding are actually encouraged, to an extent that is. Whilst the maskers are known for entering many a criminal circle, it is not their entire existence. But before we talk about the Maskers Guild and understand their greater function in Stygia, I think it is important to properly explain to you our understanding of the Moliate Arcanos. As I touched on moments ago, and many times prior to this, a wraith's body is called a corpus. This corpus is made of plasm or ectoplasm. Plasm is not a substance in the physical sense, lacking atoms and molecules, but one can shape it with soul forging, as we discussed last time. And you have to melt down the wraith and shape it to make the infrastructure, weapons, armors, and more that Stygia is built upon. Moliate allows one to shape plasm too, but the wraith themselves. Moliate, simply put, allows one to shape the corpus of themselves and others as if it were blue tack. The changes could make someone shimmer with beauty, making them appear more vibrant and alive than ever before. Maskers, as a title and guild member, quickly learn how to change/alter their appearance to make them terrific spies and actors. Of course, there are just as many who wish to turn beauty into a nightmare, disfiguring their enemies or inflicting horrible wounds in a fight. We are aware of one individual, a faithless warrior of sorts, who was shaped to become a living honed blade, looking like some necrid thing gone wrong. It must have taken the individual weeks to craft that, swapping out body parts, stretching this and that and so forth. You could just imagine the horrors that would occur if something went wrong and just how upset the model would be, and the masker too. They have a bit of an obsession with perfection and are known for leaving signatures on their creations. As such, you can expect maskers to have particularly malleable corporea, which is the plural for corpus, you know. Some of our research suggests there is more than one wraith with the same visage, regardless of whether they were twins or not. There are even stranger tales that another guild monk variant where the eyes can glow with whatever colour and intensity the wraith so desires. However, we have learned that despite these interesting masks or abilities, there is one mark that is persistent across all maskers. Those that are well versed with Moliate, as not all maskers are part of the guild of its namesake, may I remind you, have something known as a mutatus mutandis, a permanent physical characteristic that doesn't ever change. It could be the colour of their eyes, a scar or tattoo, or even a broken bone that was never set properly. Regardless of Arcanos use, it is always there. In some sense, these particular markings are probably of some significance to the wraith in some way. But what of the guild who practice and develop such an Arcanos? There is some evidence, mainly potentially biased scriptures belonging to the Masquers Guild, that Moliate is the oldest of the Arcanos, potentially developed by the Nephrax first, which puts a particularly sinister twist on the Masquer's origin, if we may pardon the pun. In any case, if you were curious, these writings state that the most ancient Arcani are Lifeweb, Castigate, Embody, Moliate, Outrage, and Argos. The Masquers Guild claim, or occasionally boast, they are the oldest guild, fashioning weapons and clothing through the means of soul shaping. The guild's arts are finely sculpting the corpus of a wraith like strangely ghostly bodycraft. This is all happening long before the existence of other guilds in the Stygian Empire. Think about those Caligula proto-guilds we spoke of before. From this, we can confirm that the Arcanos Moliate is definitely older than Inhabit. By the time the artificers did establish themselves in about 976 CE, the Masquers had cabals among the necropoli and maintained the use and trade of the Arcanos. Gradually, they continued to gather and enlarge until they had formed the base of the Masquers Guild. However, the guild was apparently unrecognized as such until the artificers had their say. Jaron and his government eventually recognized the Masquers and they pledged their services to Stygia. The guild settled in Stygian life with relative ease, getting accustomed to partaking in the politics of the time, including the squabbling and polite violence of the time, all the while presenting a pleasant face to the world, providing service to who and what they can. It did not take long for the cosmetic services of the guild would evolve into ones of assassination, the pawns of organized crime. As quick as they discovered their usefulness, their taste for wealth heightened tenfold, becoming quite the corrupt criminal organization. As such, they achieved their wealth and much more, making enemies with the Solicitors and the Minori guilds. Neither one of them struck out against the Masquers before, for various reasons. They became forbidden guilds and had their own messes to deal with. As you may suspect, the Masquers Guild were the only ones, other than the Artificers, who could profit off the war of the guilds. The other guilds would hire them to do their dirty work, seek out weaknesses and defenses, and outright fight against the others. Despite their relative power and stability when the compact of the guild was signed, the Artificers remained at the top of the heap, something that still bothers many a masker to this day. Following the compact of the guilds, the Masquers were sure to be on their best behaviour, profiting from the artistic-focused Renaissance fever that swept across the Skinlands. Alongside the Chantors and Sandmen, they blossomed, artistically speaking of course. Naturally, their assassination talents were still needed. During the revolt of the guilds, the Masquers were most naughty indeed. The Artificers, as discussed previously, had the monopoly over the guilds, and probably the hierarchy of this time, and wanted the alliance of the guilds to strengthen said monopoly. Whilst the Masquers joined the revolt, they were the first to realise it was a bad idea, to put it nicely. They were the first to leave, taking the likes of the Usurers and several other guilds with them, though some would suggest that the likes of the Harbingers and Oracles took them. Whatever the truth may be, when the fighting ended and the dust settled, the Masquers were nowhere to be found, arguably receiving the least losses. In the years following the compact of the guilds, the Masquers struggled, as did all the guilds, but they were still needed for cutthroat assassins and bargeists. Not a lot had changed for them, but there was not a lot of development in Moliate either. Where the Masquers had their moment was during the Great War, where Stygian steel was in short supply, and spectres and maelstroms galore battered necropoli across the underworld, replacing artifact and more corporeal equivalents, supplying weapons and so forth. Despite wanting a neutral stance, the Death Lords demanded that all with more than casual knowledge of Moliate were to join the legions. You can imagine how they were pressed into service with great force, whether it was deforming into facing thralls or fighting on the front lines, fighting against spectres. Of course, you can also imagine how the legions would discard most of them once their services were fulfilled. A similar story occurred when Charon prepared war against the Jade Empire, the Dark Kingdom of Jade, in Asia during the Second War, and the Fifth Great Maelstrom following it. Though, this time, the winds this maelstrom brought were far more violent and intense, leaving them even fewer survivors and everyone in disarray with the disappearance of Charon. The Masquers suffered the most casualties, according to some of our research, so the period after the Second World War was the most one of healing for the guild. Other records paint the Masquers as a slightly more powerful force during this time, that if they were at full strength, they could have assumed the Death Lord's positions of power in newer political climate. Initiation into the Masquers Guild is both very simple and rather painfully disorientating for the apprentices in question. A potential guild member is soul-shaped, from the eldest member to the newest joined. Using their abilities, the initiate must pull themselves back into their former shape. If they fail, they are resculpted and further trained. If they succeed, they are welcomed as full guild members. The Masquers Guild recruits those who have a strong sense of themselves, not the arrogant sort, though I'm certain those do exist. More the sort that doesn't base that on who they seem to be in life. The guild isn't some underground plastic surgeon, so to speak. From our research, many care very little for the quick at all, besides being a source of pathos. Moliate, as I said previously, has no effect on the quick, and it is far more powerful than any mortal equivalent. Why focus on having that perfect body when you can go the step beyond? Many maskers go a step beyond that and remove any evidence of their mortal lives, a term called anonyme, which often goes hand in hand with a particular look or lack of thereof. It is usually the more successful maskers that make this identity work. Those within the Masquers Guild are said to be a sociable guild. They have to be, as everyone around them are a potential customer. Remember the guild, are responsible for the majority of Stygia's plasmic goods. They are considered one of the great or high guilds, providing services for Stygian Wraith society to operate. It doesn't mean they are genuine when they ask you about your day. It doesn't mean they are patient individuals either, nor do they have bad memories, if you get my drift, Explorer. Maskers do try to be honest with their dealings, expecting that from their clients. At least, not naturally honest. You can probably work out what I mean by that. It is never criminal or dangerous unless there is clear payment, agreed upon and drawn up by the guild elder, often following specific templates, so you can imagine it could be quite complicated affairs. If a masker can't keep to their end of a bargain or something goes wrong, they keep part of the fee and hide the evidence. Like other guilds, there are different groups, or callings, as we have heard them referred to here, that are filled with maskers with different specialties, for lack of a better word. Whilst many can be hired from the guilds of the many guild houses, many like to do extensive background checks on their clients' reputations before arranging a meeting. They can never be too careful, you know, as is their motto. In fact, the most notorious of these are the Arrangers, that will do exactly as their name subtly implies. Why are they notorious? Because they will make most things happen. Disappearances, a desperate need for a bargeist, they will arrange anything. These are your masker assassins. Harrowings, however, are the most common, which serve as a serious warning. A more permanent warning shot is causing the wraith to vanish permanently, becoming pieces of furniture or barguest stock. Sometimes, bits of the wraith go to the Osiris before being properly taken care of. Some of these aforementioned anonymi make up their numbers. Fetchers are impersonators in the form of spies. They are trained to infiltrate any Shadowlands organization, from the hierarchy to other guilds to other dark kingdoms, spending a long time training fulfilling the role of their target. Some masters have those ties, close ties, with the Minori and can take and barter with memories. It won't surprise you that they charge an arm and a leg for it. Figuratively speaking, of course, though some may charge for those in a literal sense. Anyway, fetches are closely monitored by the guild, partly because the thought of one becoming a doppelganger, the Spectre type, is a terrifying thought. To minimize this, fetches work with the Pardoners Guild. You probably remember the Helldivers from our chat on the Doomslayers, but that was a pretty long time ago, so let me remind you. Helldivers are specially trained maskers tasked to perform specific missions, either in pairs or solo. Such tasks could include assassinations and extractions, but it requires them to go deep undercover. Maskers have an easier time than others doing this, simply because their powers of Moliate allows them to reshape their corpus and the corpus of others into fascinating and sometimes terrifying forms. Now, whether they are maskers because of their association with the guild, or the same name, or be it in the modern sense they are masters of Moliate, is truly up to your own interpretation. You may choose to believe what you wish. The Idun are essentially the plastic surgeons of the underworld and will mould anything for you, be it for a steep fee. Apprentices must show a good taste for aesthetics, not fashion, in order to be trained by a guild journeyman. Rivalries are intense because of it, which means it makes for ample opportunity for those to be ready to prove themselves. Slander and gossip is spread around like wildfire, kind of like like beauticians to our world. The martial sibling of the Adun are the warsmiths, which do exactly what you think they do. They mostly work for the hierarchy shock troopers galore, glorified killing machines and bagasts aplenty, without customizing their work like the Adun might. Warsmiths rarely lack clientele, working for all sorts of individuals. The downside is that they lack social lives and lack pathos in general, which also straps the maskers' usual cheery demeanour. We also discovered recently of smaller factions, the Chorus of Faces, who use their talents to entertain, the Fleshrights, who reshape other wraiths for aesthetic or practical purposes, the Janissaries, bands of warriors who focus on Moliate's combat applications, and the Secret Order, aka the Spiders, Master Spies, Assassins, and Thieves. Because of their line of work, their history, and the forever worrying thought about them becoming a doppelganger, it is very difficult for any of the guilds to fully trust the maskers, and yet no one complains about being the ones arming Stygia. Curious, isn't it? The maskers aim for neutrality, though they are probably the closest to the hierarchy, simply because they supply them with most of their work. Moliate doesn't violate the dictum mortem either, allowing to quietly existing in the nooks and crannies of society, rubbing shoulders with the heretics and renegades also. That said, they trust these servers the most even since before the Great Revolt. They don't work well with the Chantors, Haunters, and Proctors, believing they are the most untrustworthy. Maskers will deal with the Sandmen, who generally enjoy the maskers' creativity whilst finding the alchemists amusing, to quote one source of mine. Their neutrality is perhaps the strongest with the oracles, harbingers, and spooks, seeing them as the most reliable. The Pardoners do not trust the maskers, but they do know the maskers' need for them, as does everyone else. The maskers have just as much as an equal outlook on the monitors and artificers. There is even some hatred with the Minori and solicitors, especially the latter, and I don't think I need to tell you about their hostility towards spectres. But what about the guild tonight? As far as we are aware, the Masquers Guild is still one of secrecy and deceit, carrying out soul-shaping and assassinations for anyone and everyone, without having to step one foot into a guild house or the guild itself. Unlike the world around them, the Maskers are ignoring the changes of the Sinlands, according to some sources of ours, nor are they interested in Stygian politics. If it were not for their command over Moliate, they may have slithered away into nothingness. Of course, with the Death Lords far more paranoid over their thrones and assuming Charon's rank of Emperor, they will probably be the Maskers in the shadows of these political war fronts. If anything, the Masquers Guild is more profitable than ever before, probably fooling everyone around them, but we shall soon see, Explorer. We shall soon see indeed. To be kept updated, follow the Law by Night VTM Twitter and Instagram pages to find out when we upload each episode. You can also find out by subscribing to the YouTube channel and clicking on the little bell, as you'll be immediately notified when the latest episode is live. Until next time, farewell.